Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us with the new link and bearing with us for our little tech issue this morning. But we'll give folks another minute to get here, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our topic for today. What is CBT? So we'll get started very shortly. Okay, so our presenter today is Halver. He is our clinical supervisor for our Conewago Snyder facilities. Um, as usual, we have some helpful links down at the bottom of the webinar, including a link to our archive with past webinar topics that you're welcome to check out if this is something that you're interested in. We've been doing webinars now for over 2 years, so there's quite a selection for you to take a look at. Um, and with that, I will hand it over to Halver.
Hi, everybody. My name is Oliver, and I'll be doing this month's presentation for April. And thank you, Amber. And is my screen showing up for everybody? Okay. All right. Excellent. So, what is CBT?
Oh, I think you muted H.
Okay.
There
You
you
can
go.
hear me?
Now you're back.
All right. So, please use the Q&A box with any suggestions or questions throughout the slides. Okay. So, objectives for this presentation. First off, I'd like to start simply. We'll just begin with how does CBT help and what is CBT? After that, one of the questions that a lot of clients ask is about CBT being evidence-based, or perhaps they call home to families and say, hey, CBT really works. There's proof, there's evidence, but what does that really mean? Then we're going to get a little bit more specific in the webinar, in this presentation. We're going to start examining some of the theories and some of the techniques and methodologies behind CBT. I've chosen for this presentation, which is only 30 minutes, and CBT is a very large topic, to look at the origins of CBT, because I think that might be most helpful. And so CBT, standing for cognitive behavioral therapy, has those two components, just as the title shows us. So first we'll be looking at the influence of behavior therapy, which came first from the 1850s until about the 1970s. In 1971, actually, there's a big shift between behaviorism and cognitivism. And cognitivism, of course, refers to cognitions or thinking. So actions and behaviors. Then in the 1970s, we have a shift into thinking and mistaken beliefs. And then I'm going to close up the presentation with some more specific examples of CBT methods that we use in treatment to give you more of an idea about how CBT does kind of cohere as a therapy and approach that helps many. Okay, so how does CBT help? First off, I want to say that CBT is not just useful for addiction. It is also, and actually historically began with mental health. So with addiction, of course, we have a lot of co-occurring disorders. And also in treatment, we look at all dimensions of wellness. So yes, CBT helps with a perception of those who live in addiction that we can't stop using or that we can't stop engaging in an activity such as gambling, that we lose control. Our mental and our social health may be affected, and CBT can help with that. It can even help with dysfunction in jobs, with legal problems and relationship damage that we have caused. And of course, for co-occurring, and by that I mean typically the mental health disorders that go along with addiction, such as depression. That's actually where cognitive therapy began with Aaron Beck, who was actually at UPenn. He created his cognitive therapy approach for depression. But today, CBT is used for so many co-occurring disorders: ADHD, for stress, trauma, and anger, for coping with trauma symptoms, for even personality disorders and impulse control. And finally, in treatment, we often use the word wellness, and CBT really affects the, typically for most models, 8 dimensions of wellness that we look at. So CBT can help with emotions, can help with family and social issues, can help with goal setting and jobs and career, can help with finances, your home, and your spirituality even. Because remember, all of these dimensions of wellness can affect our addictions, can affect relapse. If we lose a job, this can become an excuse to pick up and use a substance or drink alcohol or engage in activities such as gambling, or if we're homeless, or if we have new legal problems, or if we've been through a breakup. All of these dimensions of our lives contribute to our addiction. So this term evidence-based, I don't want to spend too much time with this slide, but I'd like to just make sure we understand what that means. For some people, it's simple enough to say that evidence-based means that CBT has been consistently shown to work through a large body of research, through clinical trials and studies. And by rigorous testing, we mean that it's also been tested and compared with other approaches other than CBT. And again, it's been shown to be the most effective and reliable for working with present symptoms to help clients feel better now, to recover now in the present. By clinical practice and evidence-based, we mean that CBT has been tested with real-life people in real-life situations, not merely in science labs or controlled research environments, but with real people. And also, when it's a measurable outcome, that means that it's been shown that mood gets better, that anxiety gets better, that behaviors change, and positive, lasting changes have occurred. We've already talked a little bit about how CBT is so adaptable, how it can be used not just for a client who struggles with one kind of addiction, but also co-occurring disorders as well, such as depression, anxiety, and all the dimensions of wellness. And finally, it's been so reliable. It's the trusted method for not just clients and clinicians and treatment centers, but also politically by governments and insurance companies. Governments and insurance companies want to know that the treatment clients are receiving actually works. And that is why they trust CBT. So, what is CBT? I don't want you to be afraid of this slide, but I think it's important to understand that in the past 50 years, since the 70s, when cognitive therapy first came to the scene, there have been so many different brands and slightly different styles of ideas that are associated with different founders or clinicians in the field. So, frankly, CBT carries with it this umbrella of 20 other cognitive behavioral therapies that fall in this category. Right? So as you look down this list, there are a lot of acronyms. CT, cognitive therapy, that's been mentioned a little bit with Aaron Beck at UPenn. REBT, that's associated with Albert Ellis, and we'll be discussing him at length. But yes, there are at least 20 different approaches which fall under CBT. But by the end of the presentation, I hope we'll all be aware how CBT is really a coherent approach, right? And all of these different acronyms and different therapies actually model the same ideas and use the same system with slightly different language. Okay, so now we're beginning the origins of what CBT is, cognitive behavioral therapy. And to do this, I'd like to focus first on those pre-1971 individuals and concepts. And that has to do with habit formation and learning habits, learning behaviors, okay? And I'm just going to focus on 2 different stages. First off, we've got the classical conditioning stage, and you may recognize some names here, such as Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov's dog and bell experiments are very famous. The little Albert experiment of John B. Watson associated with classical conditioning you see on the left-hand side there, also another famous one. Um, Later in the presentation, I want to look at the right-hand side of this slide, the cognitivists as well. So that's going to be the organizing discussion for the remainder of this presentation. So first off, behaviorism. What is it? It really starts with Ivan Pavlov in the mid to late 1800s and continues all through the first half of the 20th century. Now, behaviorism has a lot to do with learning. And when we're conditioned, we learn by associations in classical conditioning. So it's really important that the senses are included in this discussion, the five senses, because, for example, with Ivan Pavlov's experiment, let's just look at that example. I think that will help illustrate. So what Ivan Pavlov did, and you can see a picture of him on the left-hand side, whenever he fed a dog in his experiment and gave him a big juicy steak, for example, he would ring a bell. Okay? And it didn't take too long for the dog to learn that the sound of the bell meant food. So, and this was actually even a physical response. So pretty soon, even Pavlov would not even give the dog any juicy meat or food at all. All he had to do was ring the bell and the dog would salivate. So it's this associational learning that happens, and it happens through the senses. Now, this is critical for addiction. A lot of times clients will talk about their triggers, about people, places, and things. But what do we mean by that? We mean that when we see a certain person, that we go to a certain place and see different environments through the senses, or when we hear certain sounds, clients and individuals can be triggered and desire to use because substance use or alcohol or other behavior addictions have been associated through the senses to people, places, and things. A second example of how classical conditioning works is on the right-hand side of your screen. You're going to see John B. Watson. Now, in the middle is a picture, a photo taken from the little Albert experiment. Now, it's very similar to Ivan Pavlov's dog experiment, but slightly different, and it does raise some ethical issues as well. So, little Albert was a very young child, just a baby, and what John B. Watson did first is he showed little Albert a white fluffy bunny. And little Albert played with the white fluffy bunny and squealed with joy. He just loved the bunny to death. And he loved actually even little white rats or white mice that were shown to little Albert. They were adorable. But then what John B. Watson did is he lay little Albert, the baby, on his back. And behind little Albert's head, where little Albert couldn't see, he placed a very large anvil and had a mallet. And this time, when John B. Watson showed the baby little Albert the bunny, he banged the anvil with the mallet. It made a really large noise, and little Albert the baby was screaming and frightened and in terror. And what John B. Watson taught little Albert was that white furry rabbits, which had been so cute and wonderful, are now terrifying. And then this terror, this fear of white rabbits was transferred slowly from one thing to another by association, so that little Albert the child became afraid of other things that were just the color white or that were just soft and furry. And in this picture, I don't know if you can see too well, but there's a gentleman wearing a mask and he's in the baby little Albert's face. And I don't know if this is an example of the Santa Claus mask or not, but that was a famous example from the study where John B. Watson and his assistants wore big Santa Claus masks with a big white bushy beard. And little Albert saw the big white bushy beard, and because he had been conditioned, he was terrified of Santa Claus. Now, ethically, the little Albert experiment is pretty controversial. Little Albert did have developmental disorders. He never really learned to speak well. He never really learned to walk and died at an extremely young age. Today, the ethical rules and oversight is much different than in John B. Watson's time, and this experiment never would have happened. All right, so the second stage of behaviorism I want to look at also has a lot to do with addiction. And this is operant conditioning. So you see B.F. Skinner on the left-hand side of the page, and in parentheses it says rats and pigeons. He loved working with rats and pigeons, but we're not talking about rats and pigeons. So all I'm going to do with operant conditioning is look at four different concepts. And these are perhaps the more basic concepts in operant conditioning or behavior modification, which can get quite complicated. But I think the examples I'm going to show you are simple enough. So first off, you're going to see positive reinforcement. And as an example, I'm saying dog treats. Now, what happens when you want to teach a dog a new trick, right? When you want to teach a dog a new trick, you give him a dog treat when he does it. And this reinforces, it rewards the dog so that the dog will do the trick again in the future. So that's the description right there. Something good is added. Something good is added. A dog treat is added to increase a behavior, to make sure that the dog does the trick more often in the future. So that is positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is slightly different. Here I put seatbelt alarm. So suppose you get in your vehicle and you decide to break the law and not wear your seatbelt, and you take off and drive away. So what happens, right? There's this annoying beeping sound for in your car alarm going beep, 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 and it's incredibly bad and annoying. And so what happens when you plug in your seatbelt? The beeping goes away. This is negative reinforcement. Okay, so what is the something bad that's taken away? That's the annoying beeping sound, right? And because of this situation, what is the behavior that's going to increase more in the future? People are going to wear their seatbelt more often. Okay, so wearing seatbelts is increased by taking away an annoying thing. Now, both of these two concepts of reinforcement have a lot to do with addiction. It's not a perfect example, but for positive reinforcement, instead of a dog treat, what if we thought about opioids, such as heroin or fentanyl? There could be an analogy to say that fentanyl and heroin are the most powerful Uber dog treats in the universe because the pleasurable experience that one has when they take fentanyl or an opioid, right? That is the thing that is added. And what is the behavior that is increased without bound, without control? We take heroin and fentanyl and opioids again and again and again. And they're so powerful, right? The positive reinforcement is so extreme that the taking of this drug becomes unstoppable. So that is positive reinforcement. Now, negative reinforcement also works with substance use, but slightly differently. Suppose that, for example, we struggle with social anxiety, okay? And to deal with anxiety, we take a few drinks at the party, and suddenly we're the center of the party. Or maybe we take a few benzodiazepines like Valium or Ativan, and it takes away all our fears and anxieties. And everybody loves us, and we're talking, and we're social, and we feel good. That's negative reinforcement. So the bad thing that's taken away, that's the social anxiety. Right? And what is increased? We drink more and more. We pop Valium and Ativan more and more, right? That behavior increases once again without bound. So reinforcement really taps in, and sometimes it's called the reward part of our brains, right? It ties into that. Punishment, I'm gonna just take a little bit less time with that, but my examples here I think are pretty easy to follow. With positive punishment, I wrote incarceration. So we do something bad, right? We break a law, right? So to decrease the behavior of us breaking the law, something bad is added, right? The negative, awful experience of going to jail is added on, okay? And the idea is that we will decrease our criminal behavior in the future. Negative punishment, I wrote confiscating a kid's phone. So in this case, you take something good away to decrease the behavior, right? So your kid is misbehaving. They've done something bad. So you take away something that they like a cell phone or their video games. That's negative punishment. All right, so now we've hit 1971 and we're switching from behaviorism to mentalism or cognitivism. And the first individual I'd like to look at is Albert Ellis. And before I look at some specific theories and strategies and methods of Albert Ellis, such as our EBT and the ABC model, I want to look at his influences because he famously said that perhaps his greatest influences for creating the cognitive side of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, was actually ancient Greek philosophy. He loved Stoicism, and he famously would quote Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus here that we have today. And I'm just going to read this quote because it really captures what cognitive theory is all about. The quote: "Men are not disturbed by things, but by the view they take of them." So, according to CBT and the cognitive side of this technique, it's not these outside things that cause us to become angry or make us depressed, right? Or make us stressed out or anxious. That's not, has nothing to do with the external world. We're not disturbed by those things. What we're disturbed by is the way we think about them, the way we perceive them, the view we have about them. Okay? So if we are negative about a certain situation, we're going to feel negative, right? Because our thoughts dictate our emotions and thereby our actions. Okay? But if we have a positive, courageous, grateful perspective or way of looking at things, we feel good and our actions reflect that. Also, Albert Ellis was stated that his other major influence was actually Alfred Adler, who was a contemporary of Freud, but extremely different from Freud. He created a school that he called individual psychology. And I'd just like to show you how he mirrors the ancient Greeks, but also, as we'll see, the rest of these founders of CBT. First off, Adler said that our behavior comes from the way we perceive things, our mistaken beliefs, our mistaken ideals. Okay. And just like Epictetus 2,300 years ago, Alfred Adler also said that we don't suffer because of these outside things. The direct quote here in this slide is that we do not suffer from the shock or the experience of a trauma. That's not what matters. We suffer because of how we choose to think about the trauma in the present moment, which is all that matters. For CBT, the past is gone. It doesn't exist. The trauma is gone. It doesn't matter. It doesn't exist anymore. All that matters is how we think about the past in the present moment, because the thoughts that we have, that we put into our heads, create our emotions and dictate our actions and our behaviors. And finally, Alfred Adler was famous for developing this idea of how we have fictive premises or fictive notions and mistaken beliefs and hypotheses that will permeate all of CBT for the past 50 years. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at Albert Ellis and his ABC model. Um, First off, Albert Ellis kept changing his theories. First, he called it RET, and then he added a B in there, so it was REBT. And then he said he had this ABC model, but then he added two more letters, D and E, so it's actually ABCDE model. But it's fairly easy to follow and to learn. So A stands for that activating event. This is that outside thing that we think stresses us out, right? It's the activating event that creates worry or anger, okay? B is that second step. These are our ideas or the way we perceive this outside event. Right? The irrational beliefs or the negative self-talk, the thoughts that we let into our head that are actually going to create C, the consequences. And the consequences for Ellis are those negative emotions and the neuroses that come directly from our thoughts and our mistaken beliefs, not from the activating event. Between the activating event and the emotions that are created, there are the thoughts. And that's important. That's central to CBT. The rest of this model for Ellis has to do with the therapist's role. For D, the therapist helps clients to dispute these irrational thoughts and beliefs. Okay. And finally, because these are disputed, we have E, the effects, the positive psychological effects that arise from getting rid of all of these negative thoughts in our head, all of these mistaken ideas and beliefs that we have. Okay? Next, I'm just going to look quickly at what these kind of mistaken beliefs were for Robert Ellis. Robert Ellis, he had 11 or 12, depending on when he was publishing, irrational beliefs for maladaptive behaviors, right? Which would include things like addiction, which will include things like developing depression or criminal behavior or other types of maladaptive behavior. Albert Ellis did have a strange sense of humor, and he actually did repeatedly refer to his 11 irrational beliefs as masturbations, because this was developed on Haney, who believed that her 11 irrational beliefs were the should errors or the must errors. So for Albert Ellis, his irrational beliefs all had to do with this verb must. Okay? So, for example, it is irrational for us to believe that we must have the approval of others. Right? If we do that, then we're always trying to please other people, and they may not like what we're doing, right? And then we're going to be hurt, and then we're going to doubt ourselves, and then we're going to judge ourselves. Another mistaken belief, like number 2 up here, we must not fail. Perfectionism, right? Perfectionism doesn't work for us because we can't be perfect. That's impossible. And when we do try to be perfect all the time, we're very stressed. We can become very anxious. And then when we aren't perfect, we get frustrated, we get annoyed, we get angry. Right? So it creates these emotions just from these underlying beliefs that we put into our head and fill our heads with negative self-talk. You'll see down here awfulizing, catastrophizing, all of these different ones. Number 5, you'll see, comes directly from his quote from ancient Greece and also to Alfred Adler. Unhappiness arises from outside things. No, no, outside things have nothing to do with us. It's only our thoughts that create the unhappiness and our beliefs that create that unhappiness. From here, I'm just going to look at 2 more examples of how Ellis and Beck and then Glasser, 3 examples of CBT creators or founders, have very similar views, and how, even though we have a different acronym, it's not CBT or ABC, this one is CT, we're still talking about the same thing. We're still talking about the underlying concepts and theories and techniques and methodologies and models that make CBT cohere. So for Aaron Beck, he was at UPenn in Pennsylvania. He talked about schemas and automatic thoughts, the self-talk, the thoughts that come in our head that arise from different beliefs that we have. And these automatic thoughts, when they're maladaptively linked to behaviors that are dysfunctional, he called cognitive distortions. And you'll see this most often today. The all or nothing thinking, the idea that we have to have things our way or not. Well, things don't always go our way, and we get anxious when we don't. We get angry and frustrated when they don't. The all or nothing thinking, the my way or the highway, creates these negative emotions, and it's all created in our heads because of the thoughts that we put in. Mind reading is another popular one. Mind reading. We never know what other people are thinking. But we get stuck all the time thinking that all the people around us are judging us, or we feel that way because we have that mistaken belief, even if we're not conscious of it. Personalization, I like that one. That's this belief that everything is about us, right? Or that everybody is thinking about us all the time. Well, that's not true. Really, nobody probably is really thinking about us at all, right? Even if we believe that in our heads. They're all stuck in their own heads. They're not thinking about us. It's this mistaken belief or cognitive distortion that really just creates unhappiness and misery that Beck is looking at. Finally, I'm just going to give you guys a taste of William Glasser, reality therapy. Instead of cognitive distortions like Aaron Beck, instead of masturbations, right, like Albert Ellis, he chose to call his list of items 10 axioms of choice therapy. He has a slightly different flavor that's unique, and that's why I wanted to share this one. But if you dig deep enough, you'll see that we're still talking about the same ideas, and that reality therapy should be included in the CBT as well. He said, if you look at number 7, that all we can do is behave. But if you go down to number 8, you'll see what behavior means for William Glasser. Total behavior, that was his term, includes not just our actions, but also our thoughts and our feelings. And he included our bodies, our physiology as well. Because we do have physical symptoms when we get anxious or afraid or stressed out. Okay? Physiology matters. And I appreciate that William Glasser included that into his reality therapy. But if you look down at number 9, once again, you see that we're right back to thinking that underlies all of the emotions and all of our actions, right? We can only have direct control over the actions we choose and the thoughts that we put into our own heads. Our feelings are out of our control. They emerge because of our thoughts. Okay? We can't control our emotions, but we can control the thoughts that create those emotions. And we can choose to act in a certain way so that we don't put ourselves in a position where we, because of the consequences, feel a certain way. We can only choose how to think, and we can only choose how to act. That's central to CBT. The last thing William Glasser might have said, which is a bit curious, is he only named behaviors according to verbs. He would never say that a person is depressed. Okay? He would only say that we choose to depress ourselves. Okay? It's because that is a choice. Right? We're not victims of depression. We choose to depress ourselves because of the thoughts and the actions that we have, that we choose to have and do have. All right, so we've hit up our 30 minutes, and I have to end it here. As you can see, CBT is an enormous topic, but I hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction to what I feel is important with CBT. Please join us again next month in May. It'll be on May 20th at 12 p.m. Our presentation will be motivational interviewing with our very own corporate clinical director, Amber Bidler. Amber, I hand it back to you.
Thank you. I did put the registration link in the chat, so if you're interested in that topic, we were prepared with that link, if not our link from this morning. So, but thanks again for kind of bearing with us with the change in the link. Thank you, Halver, for presenting today, and we hope to see you for our future webinars. Thank you.